This conference will now be recorded.
No, you just click here.
Okay, so everybody's muted right now?
Yeah. Phone. The people on the phone. Mute.
Okay,
They have to.
all right. So do me a favor, if you're on a phone, you have to mute yourself. So make sure that you mute yourself. We're getting a lot of background noises. And then if you have questions at the end of each session, then make sure to raise your hand and I will call on you. How about that? And like I said, this is new territory for me, so please be patient. So let's go to slideshow. From the beginning. So I'll do a welcome again. Oh, why is that there? And thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. What our goal is to get some recommendations from a major group of stakeholders. Oops. Hang on one more time.
They're seeing a difference. They're seeing this one.
That's what I want right now.
No, you want them to see this.
Oh. So we're just seeing the two screens. Hang on, guys. Sorry about that. Just go back to the one if they see two split thingies. It's okay. We're not going to be able to fix it. Okay. Sorry if you're getting multiple screenshots on this thing. I apologize. We'll get the hang of this before it's over with. So going back, our goal is to make some recommendations to to DEP on how to go forth with recycling after 2020. We know we're not going to make that 75% goal, and we're okay on that. We just want to come up with some new ways of doing it. And EP, Eric, please put your phone on mute for me, please. So I'm getting some background noise. I think that's the only one right now. So the purpose today is our different committees are going to have been meeting quite a bit, and they have come up with some recommendations, or we might just give you a status of where we are, because I know, for example, like the diversion reduction committee, Keith may be able to join us later on. He is stuck in another meeting, so I'll walk through those slides. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our survey questions. Tammy Khalil is going to take care of that for us. The weight-based goals, Jean Jones, SMM Malik and Dr. Townsend are leading the charge on that committee. And then like the diversion reduction is Keith Howard. So do me a favor, like I said, if you're on a phone, you need to mute it. I'll be able to unmute you if you're on your screen. And then once again, we want you to raise your hand if you have comments or questions as we move forward. And so let's get started. Okay, next one. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is turn this over to Tammy. And Tammy, I apologize, I can't share my screen. We're just having technical difficulties. So if you just tell me next slide, you guys know this one pretty well, and I know it pretty well too, so I think I can keep up with you. So let me, how do I unmute? Erin, how do I unmute?
Hey, I unmuted myself, Tina.
I got it.
I think I unmuted myself. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now. So I think a lot of you have met Tammy before in the past. Tammy has her own consulting firm right now, but you might be going, Tammy Khalil, I know that name from somewhere. And she spent several years at Disney doing all of their sustainability programs and all of that jazz, shall we say. So she I talked her into being our facilitator for this survey questions committee, and her committee has done a great job. So Tammy, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, let's start off by going to the next slide because Kina nailed it. We had a really great subcommittee. And you can see everyone's name here. It's probably half of this entire phone call is on right now that participated in our survey questions committee. And if you want to go ahead to the next slide, Kina, our committee started out by taking a look at some of the early work that was done by the work group to outline some preliminary questions around, what it is that we want to know from the various audiences that the partnership will be presenting to around recycling and those future goals that Kina mentioned earlier. So we came up with, looking at those questions and then talking amongst ourselves as a committee, we came up with several goals, and then we designed our questions in order to meet these goals. So you can see them here. One is that we wanted to assess the awareness of the current recycling goal and our progress. The second is understand what the reasons are that various audiences are actually participating in recycling. So you'll see a little bit more about that. Gathering input on what's important to successfully deliver recycling programs, suggestions for how to improve recycling programs, and then perspectives concerning the future goal that ultimately will be recommended by this group. And then lastly, we wanted to gauge commitment for recycling moving forward. And so hopefully, as you see when we go through the questions, we've designed them so that we could keep it pretty simple and pretty straightforward, but still get a gauge from the various audiences how we're doing against, or what their perspectives are around some of these goals. So next slide, Kina. So as it related to measuring awareness, we started out by asking the various participants what their level of knowledge is about recycling. And we felt like that was really super important because depending on people's level of knowledge, they may or may not feel qualified to answer some of the following questions. But if they said, I'm a beginner, and then they rated, then it might feel a little bit more comfortable for them. We asked if multiple choice, if they know what the current recycling goal is for 2020. Question 3 looks at the recent report that just came out that says, okay, what is the actual rate going to be in 2019? And we give people a multiple choice option for that. And then basically asking whether or not the state of Florida will meet the 2020 goal and giving folks, again, that option. And then if they have a perspective, giving them the opportunity to share any contributing factors to support the answer to question 4. Next slide. From there, we asked folks to rank their top 3 reasons for continuing recycling in their communities or organizations. And what you see here is a consolidated list. So we went through several iterations to try to pare this list down, but ultimately felt like there was enough difference depending on who the audience member might be to justify keeping all of these options. So we ask folks to rank their top 3, and they include everything from various aspects of the environment to different aspects of the economy, as well as outward CSR types of efforts. And then we also give people an out to say other in case we haven't, or if we've forgotten anything, or if there's another reason why this is a priority in various communities. Next slide. Continuing on with the ranking the top 3 factors. So once people tell us why it's important, we want them to tell us what's essential for creating or delivering a successful recycling program. And again, we ask them to rank the top 3 with an option for other if we haven't covered what's critical for them in delivering their recycling programs. Next slide. And then lastly, we ask for their top 3 inputs on how to improve their current recycling programs. So you can see we ask why it's important, then what do they need to create or deliver, and then what do they need to improve in this question. So we're asking for their top 3, again, with the opportunity to provide additional feedback through the other option. Next slide. Lastly, we ask folks what's most important or which best reflects their sentiments about any perspective on the future of Florida's recycling goals. And you can see here, there's only 4 options. One is Florida being in a leadership position in the country in the Southeast. The second is sticking with the current 75% recycling rate and developing specific strategies to achieve that. The third is setting a more realistic goal. And the last is having no statewide goal and letting counties and cities and businesses and the free market determine recycling programs. So just 4 options on that one. And then next slide, Keena. The last group here of questions is around gauging commitment. So we're asking the audience if they feel like recycling should be a key priority, and giving them several options here. We ask if they recognize that there's a cost to recycling and if they're willing to invest in it and how willing they are. And then lastly, recognizing that there's an investment to promote recycling, are they willing to invest in that? So then you see the 3 options there. So our next steps, if you go to the next slide, we're just to review this amongst ourselves, which I should have put a check mark there because we've reviewed it several times and feel like we've gotten it as far as we can get it at this point. And then we're doing today, reviewing the updates with our entire work group. But then the next step is preparing this survey to be delivered. So we think that might be SurveyMonkey or some other electronic format for now. I know Keena's been reaching out to specific groups to see if we can use them as a test for these survey questions and see how the survey flows and if the questions actually make sense to people who are taking this survey who haven't been as deeply involved in the work as all of us have, and then making any adjustments as needed before we go out to even more audiences. So those are the updates from the survey questions committee. I know we went through the questions pretty quickly, but if anyone has any questions, I'm sure Keena or myself or other survey committee members can answer them for you.
And I was going to bring this up at the end. You will get a copy of this whole webinar today. And also, like we said in the very beginning, it is being recorded because a couple of people could not be with us today and asked for it to be recorded. So you're going to get this, and there's going to be a timeline. Take about a week for you to review everything and then get back to us if you have any suggestions or edits and things of that nature. But Don McCormick and David Gregory started off with a series of questions, and they're part of this group as well. And thanks to Tammy and the rest of the team, they came together with this group of recommendations, and I think you guys have done a great job, and thank you very much. All right, any questions specifically on this?
Yes, this is Miriam. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
First, I just want to say great job on this survey. Great job to the team. Why on page 5, I'm just curious, why was the question about goal setting, why were the 2 sectors of commercial and municipalities rolled up into one, since one is going to be related to the goal that will be set, whether it's statewide or local, and the other is an individual corporate and only will impact those working for those employees? Why were those 2 sectors combined into one question on page 5 versus separated?
Let's take a look, Miriam. I think
Talking about question number 9.
5, it's on page 5.
I'm showing slide 10, so I don't have your page numbers.
It's on, if you look here on page 8 right now is on the screen, Keena, that we're seeing. So if you could go back 3 more pages. Here, Miriam, on this one.
Let me see here. Sorry, it's really small. I'm on my, I thought it was page 5, but I guess not.
Well,
yes, it's a 6E. 6E.
Okay, thanks, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that that was a conscious choice. I think it was, there wasn't Yeah, it was that we felt like sustainability goal, the concept here that we were going for was sustainability goals. So achieve sustainability goals might be a better way to say it, given your point of corporate or municipal might be very different. I think the emphasis though was that achieving sustainability goals might be bump recycling up as a priority for different organizations or communities. So corporate and municipal, because we said community or organization, we left it in that kind of framework. But if you feel like that's confusing, we could shorten it to just achieve sustainability goals.
Well, the only reason I bring that up is because what the recycling work group has been talked about, has been talking about from the beginning is where this is headed. So the recommendation is going to the DEP, which will then be rolled up to the legislature, and it's going to be related to the goals that municipalities set. So I'm definitely, I mean, obviously corporations play a big role in their large generators and a local governments meeting their sustainability goal. So, I mean, I think it's a good question. I just think that they should be separated because of the end results of where we've been told this is headed.
Got it.
Hey, Miriam, this is David Gregory, and I can go back to this being an original question that we put together. And there's a reason why is a municipal government is going to have a municipal goal, but if someone from the public sector or the private sector is answering this question, they may have, again, corporate goals. So it's if we are addressing multiple audiences, many different people will have different ideas, and the idea is they may have a corporate goal or they may have a municipal goal depending on where they sit.
Absolutely no. I'm not disagreeing with that statement at all. It's related to how, you know, I do a lot of surveys. I've done a lot of survey work over the last 28 years, and it's, you know, it's about where this is going at the end. So in terms of where that's going and the recommendations on what we've been told from the beginning, I'm just suggesting that those two be separated because they serve different purposes for the end result of how this is going to be utilized from what we've been told.
Got it. Thank you, Miriam. I think I got it. So make it two options instead of just one single option, or be able to segregate the results so that we know if it's a corporate responder or a municipal responder. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Good. Thank you. I also see two. Oh, go ahead.
I also actually have just a couple of comments, and they can be answered, you know, later or in a response later. But I noticed there was no discussion about infrastructure costs. You know, every region or every MRF is different, and you know you can ask all the education questions you want. You can have all the education material that you want, but if the infrastructure isn't, you know, up to par or you know, higher tech versus a rudimentary, you know, you don't have any programs. So I was curious why some of the infrastructure, there was no infrastructure questions in the survey at all for both the private sector and municipalities to answer regarding the survey. And so I was just curious about that. The only one I saw was on page 11. That was an investment question about the cost associated. You know, would you make an investment to improve recycling? And it was very vague. So I just wanted to give the survey committee feedback on that. I was very surprised that an infrastructure question was left out of the survey, considering you don't have a program at all or goals without, you know, looking at what type of infrastructure is set up throughout the state.
Great. And so Miriam, are you thinking that we would ask different, well, hold that thought. I think there was a question in the chat about the intended audiences for this. So Kina, I don't know if you want to say just a word about the intended audiences that we would be asking for feedback from. And then Miriam, I'll come back to your question about infrastructure.
So the audiences that we had so far have been a variety. And in the very beginning, I said we're going to have different surveys for different groups, and got pushback because it was wanting to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So you're going to have a variety of different organizations looking at this, anywhere between Recycle Florida Today, SWANA, NWRA, the people that are, you know, boots on the ground and dealing with recycling every day. Then you move over to possibly doing like the Florida Retail Federation, Florida League of Cities, Association of Counties, municipal groups like that, Chamber of Commerce. I don't have my list in front of me, I'm sorry. But so you see, it's a variety of different groups. Keep Florida Beautiful, we're hoping will be one of our survey takers. So it goes from corporate to, like I said, our everyday recycling professionals and solid waste professionals that are out there.
Thank you, Kina. And so Miriam, a question about infrastructure that you're suggesting. Are you asking, should we ask people to rate the quality of the infrastructure available in their community? Or do you have a specific general direction that you think we should be considering?
Not exactly at this time. I just noticed that to me was one big gaping hole I thought was in the survey, just because, like I said, without the infrastructure, you don't have a program, or nor can you meet goals. So, it would be important, I think, an important question to ask not only the private, both the private and the public sector about, that based on, materials, meeting the goals, all that. But I think the only, and I could be wrong, the only question that I saw that could potentially relate to either collection or MRF infrastructure was on page 11, the question regarding investing. And I thought that it was, I think, well, it would be good to know what the intention was, because it was very vague. So I'm curious about that.
I think on this specific, these specific questions, we were trying to get an understanding from folks and plant a seed that there would be a cost associated with recycling, and gauge their level of commitment to spending to promote or invest in recycling. But you're right, it is intentionally vague, simply because it's going to be different for different audiences, and we were trying to keep the questions pretty consistent. It sounds like some timing in though. Hang on, maybe another survey committee member is trying to add additional detail. No, okay, sorry, go ahead, Miriam.
Because I'm sure you know this, Tammy, with any survey, you're looking obviously at the goals and then the end purpose used for its application. And which is, as I said, it's been very clear, and it's great, to know where it's headed. But it's, for example, municipalities, to ask that question to municipalities who will be implemented by, affected by any goal that's, whatever goal might be, or whether it's state, local, whatever might happen in the future, they would be, they would look at that question and say, well, absolutely, yes, we invest in it every day. And there hasn't been a lot of funding given to local governments over the past, the grants are gone, all that. So it's almost, that's such a moot question to them. And then the private sector, has to invest because they've been on contract. So that question to me was very vague, and I didn't understand its application for the in-use application to where this is headed once again. And it goes back to the broader comment of infrastructure, and I'm done, so I don't want to take up all the time on the call. Those were the big things that came up for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your feedback. Anything else before we move on? Okay, well, last thing, a reminder that Kina mentioned, we had a really great team on this, and who rallied to complete this at the end as we were getting additional feedback. So thank you, everyone, for all of your hard work on this and the reviews, and I'll turn it back to Kina.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks so much. Next up, we're going to have Jean Jones, and everybody knows Jean from SWIX. So Jean, take it away. I think you need to unmute yourself.
How about now?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Our committee looked at this regarding to the waste-based recycling targets. As you all know, the majority of solid waste is managed that way in terms of what's driving the recycling goal and the programs to date. However, one of the problems I think we all recognize is this quantity over quality issue is leading us to problems. You've got inefficiencies, you've got situations where you've got contamination problems, And so looking at this from the standpoint of, transferring over to a circular economy / sustainable materials management, we're going to have to rethink what we end up doing to improve environmental protection, as well as performance, economic performance across the whole chain. So if you can kind of switch over to the next slide for me, Keena. We need to look at developing a recycling goal that is scientifically and strategically based on recycling the right materials efficiently in order to achieve a desired environmental, sustainable economic outcome. I know in Tammy, going back to your prior little presentation right there on the survey, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me was the recycling goals that were listed in one of the questions. And they ranged anywhere from 75% at various subject matters. And one of the concerns I had related to that is it almost looks like we're pulling those numbers out of the air again, which is where we have a problem with the 75% recycling as it stands now in Florida statute. My personal opinion is I think we need to have something in there that kind of gets us back to the research that maybe Tim is doing and Malik with regard to what that number should really be from a scientific basis. So I throw that out there. The recommendations from the committee, if you'll switch over to the next slide, Keena, was to incorporate sustainable materials management life cycle analysis to determine the cost and benefits of recycling specific materials. This shifts the focus away from broad-based metrics to a more particular measurements of materials. Conduct behavioral research. All right, so we're going to be talking about changing the recycling rate or whatever number we come up with. If we make changes from sustainable materials management or to sustainable materials management, we're going to have to start thinking about the general public and how we affect behavior of the general public to do the right thing and recycle the right materials. We need to foster recycling education, which kind of ties into that, to generate or educate the general public to recycle the right materials and convey the why that reason is. And then we need to research this and select the appropriate methodology, tying back into life cycle analysis to measure not only the environmental but economic benefits and the harms caused by creation of management various materials over their life cycle. And Tim has done a great, and I think have done a great job looking at specific materials and what are the the environmental attributes of recycling certain materials over another. And then finally, research and calculate the true value of the bin. This is something that Steve with PepsiCo is recommended that we kind of get an understanding of exactly what is the value of the bin in terms of the materials that we're collecting, not only from an economic standpoint, but from an environmental decision process so that we can drive policy. We need to foster the development of recycling markets. It does us no good to collect materials, and I've hyped on this year in and year out. If we don't have a home to go with this material, why continue to collect certain materials that are going to end up going back to landfill and just causing more environmental detriment for collecting it, as well as economic impact to various communities if we don't have a place to go with it and there's not an economic driver to it. In my opinion, we have to start thinking about this from a business perspective. You have to look at it from the standpoint of what are the economic impacts and the overall value of collecting some of these materials. And then foster efficiency in the recycling supply chain. So I think all of those kind of tie in with where I think the state needs to head from a policy perspective. And so with that, I'll leave it to the group if I've got any questions on what we've done so far.
And like I said, you'll have some time to make some comments on there. I think all the committees, we kind of had like subcommittees with names on them, kind of morphed into other areas as well, but that's okay because they're sharing some of their recommendations for the full group that we might not have had it in a certain silo. So I'm happy to see that they've given some really good recommendations. Any questions? All righty, let's go to the next. So Dr. Townsend and Malik are heading up our S&M committee. We've had one committee meeting so far, and we're going to have some more. But Malik, I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Hi, everyone. Hope you guys are all doing well, hanging in there. I know it's been crazy. So we started meeting about the S&M committee, and because of all the craziness, we weren't able to have as much meetings as everybody else. But we kind of just started going over again what SMM is, and a lot of these slides, most of you probably have already seen if you came to any of our meetings or the conference presentations. So I'm not going to dwell too much time on them, but just so that you guys could also be all caught up to speed, we just wanted to introduce again what SMM is. And it's just pretty much a new fancy word for solid waste management, where instead of just considering you throwing away something, now you're trying to consider the environmental impact associated with it, the economic and the social. So switching over to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we started all our SMM work with the Hinckley Center project back in 2016, and that was called Florida State of the State Solid Waste Management. And we really wanted to just map all of the flows associated with construction demolition debris, yard trash, residential and non-residential waste, so that we could learn where are our opportunities to increase the recycling rate. Is there a way for us to measure the current greenhouse gas footprints or the energy footprints and even the cost? So we came up with methods to do all of that. And in doing so, we wanted to see, well, we have the 75% recycling rate goal. What are the means for us to get there if we were to maybe increase more waste energy facility capacity or build a bunch of MRFs or institute some recycling mandates? And all in all, there really wasn't one scenario that told us, hey, if you did this, you're going to get this greenhouse gas emission reduction, you're going to get this energy, and this is also going to make you reach 75%. So we started thinking, all right, well, in the spirit of SMM, what do we really care about? And it's not let's increase the recycling rate, but let's find the best management of our materials. And oftentimes that's specifically looking at, let's consume less materials and let's prioritize, if you do need to recycle certain materials and prioritize it, how can we do that? Well, we started looking at life cycle assessment and life cycle assessment models like the EPA WARM. And that just gives you the opportunity to measure certain components associated with 1 ton of material. So going over to the next slide, we learned through life cycle assessment that 1 ton of recycled paper or aluminum doesn't equal one another. So keep on going over to the next slide, we'll see that certain materials, when you recycle them, they have a much better greenhouse gas emissions offset or energy. And in the next slide, we show specifically the energy impacts associated with recycling a specific material. And here we show a few different ones. Clearly, aluminum cans has one of the greatest impacts in energy, and that's a lot because of the extraction and the manufacturing energy that it takes to make it in the first place. So learning what we did from mapping the solid waste footprints in terms of mass, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and energy and in cost, and then using these life cycle assessment tools, we started thinking, well, what are new ways to come up with a recycling goal? So going over to the next slide, we started thinking of, well, we can probably find a way to incorporate sustainable materials management or SMM. So one of our first approaches, so please to the next slide, is specifically looking at weighting our recycling rate that totaled 75% not just by tons, but by a sustainability metric. So something like the greenhouse gas emissions or the energy or even water consumption. And we've been working with the Hinckley Center, and we've found a few different ways to incorporate some of these, I would say, metrics into tools. And one of them specifically here, what we were proposing is looking at it in terms of a weighted recycling rate. That way people could still see this recycling or this percentage and associate it with recycling, but they'll also be able to see that, all right, now I know that if I recycle a ton of glass, it's not going to give me the same environmental impact if I recycle a ton of aluminum cans. So although it sounds pretty easy, it's actually very complicated, and there's a lot of assumptions that go into it. And in terms of trying to account for things like source reduction, which recycling rates don't do right now, if we were to create this baseline, if we were to create this metric, you would need to come up with some kind of a baseline. So you would choose maybe the year 2008 or 2020. So in terms of this specific approach, we do have published a paper. So if you are interested in learning more about it and how we've already tried applying it to Florida specifically, I'd be more than happy to share that paper with you. I know you're probably very excited to read a lot more fun scientific papers during staying at home and working. So the other approach, if you could switch over to the next slide, is I think a bit more simplified, where we use SMM and we use what we learned from life cycle assessment, and we start prioritizing specific materials. And we do that by setting a weight-based goal that's higher for certain components. For example, since aluminum cans are just so energy, greenhouse gas intensive, maybe we would set an 80% recycling rate instead of just a 75% recycling rate or a 25% recycling. There's no exact algorithm, and I know that Jean was talking about, well, what's the perfect way to find the value of the bin, and how can we find a appropriate recycling rate for that material? There are numerous ways to do that, and we've explored a few of them, but there still hasn't been one specific strategy that we've completely developed so that I could present that to you. Overall, just using the concept of SMM, we want to try and impact the materials that are most impactful, and not necessarily say you don't want to recycle the less impactful materials, but certain materials certain materials should be prioritized because we all have limited resources. So I've also published another paper that's kind of talking about this point right here. So if you guys are interested as well and you feel like dozing off in the middle of your day, please let me know. The next slide is just my contact information, but I believe you guys should all have it. If not, there it is. Thank you guys.
Great, Malik, thank you so much. What I'll do, if you'll shoot me the links for those studies, I'll include that when I send out this presentation. And so that way they'll have that, they can get that and look at it. Any questions? I'm still learning a lot about SMM, that's for sure. So thank you, thank you.
I have a question. This is Miriam Zims with Kessler Consulting. I have a question.
Yeah.
Hey, Malik, thank you for a great presentation. Always enjoy seeing your presentations over the years on this subject matter. So I'm curious about the practical application with the different infrastructures that local governments have throughout the state. They vary. So the implementation of either of the two that different sections that you mentioned about the different ways to look at it, whether it's on a weight-based or prioritized material. So how would that work where the infrastructure is different for different regions or parts of the state based on the municipality or the local government, in terms of a prioritized material based on how heavy it is? So how would that be? You can look at prioritizing weight-based materials based on different things: infrastructure, waste composition, production. So where are you all headed in terms of how you will prioritize that. That's related to page 8 of your presentation.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question because we have such a variety of waste management structures with all 67 counties, and there's definitely no single one size fits all solution. And I think what would be really great is if there was somehow a tool that maybe kind of like how health exists, where every single county uses it, they would be able to put in a specific information about their counties, and then using this life cycle stuff, we could do all the background behind the scenes work in whatever that tool would look like, and we would be able to tell them, you know, if you cared about specifically greenhouse gas emissions, these are the materials you want to target. Or if you cared about maybe water use, let's look at materials instead. And it would be great because then you'd be able to really just drive this idea of community-based decisions where you don't have just one measurement or one metric. You would be able to incorporate multiple ones.
And thank you. Yeah, okay. Well, that's good that it gives more of a balanced assessment. Are you all going to use waste calc in any way in that capacity?
Yeah, so we've been working actually with Karen and a lot of the folks from DEP over the past few years to update waste calc, and we've been incorporating it into some of our Hinckley Center project work. So we've definitely been actively using waste calc.
And then lastly, I read the report that was released regarding looking at MRF contamination, and I noticed that in the report it said not all MRFs throughout the state had provided information. Do you feel that you had enough to make statistically valid assertions for the state on those contamination rates as it relates to, you know, the materials management approach and the future of what's going to be recommended from the work you all are doing?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to say that as a scientist, I can't just feel comfortable saying that it's statistically valid because I didn't run any statistical analysis on it. But I can tell you that it represents many areas within Florida, and it also represents about 20% or so of the total recycled mass. So from looking at those specific indicators, I would feel comfortable to say that it does represent the current status of the contamination rates in Florida. And there were a few people who did want to provide us some information. They were namely private haulers, but they either just got really caught up because of the end year reports, and then once the start of the year began, COVID kind of came out of nowhere. So some of them still would love to provide us information, but hopefully we could use that in another iteration if we continue to do something like that project again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Malik, thank you. Great job as always. Is Keith on yet? Okay. I'm not seeing him. Okay, Miriam, would you put your phone on mute for me, please? For some reason, I'm not being able to do that. Thanks. So since Keith's not here, and hopefully John Coverson and Karen Moore can help me out, I'll walk through what the committee did. This committee is going to have probably another meeting or two to kind of come up with some more recommendations. But what we did, we looked at the EPA hierarchy, and we looked at some definitions, some possible measurements, and some goals. So, oops, come on, mouse. There we go. So I think everybody pretty much is familiar with the EPA hierarchy for solid waste management, where source reduction and reuse is at the top. And then you work your way down to the recycling, composting, energy recovery, which could be your waste to energy, and then with your treatment and disposal being your least preferred. So the committee liked that concept, and let me back up again, I'm sorry. Like that concept, and would think that maybe one of the recommendations would be to have DEP, our Florida Department of Environmental Protection, adopt the EPA waste management hierarchy. And then definitions, we went through a lot of different types of definitions. We were provided some from SWANA, EPA, but it seemed for the committee that the current definitions worked, especially for recycling. And as far as composting, composting isn't under the Florida Statute 403 8.703. It's under the organics, and that definition of composting works as well. And then, but however, what we may need to do is look at some new definitions to support that hierarchy we talked about before. For example, waste diversions. There's two different varieties here. There's one that, I forget where that one came from. The first one, the second one came from EPA. So we're looking for the group to kind of give us some guidance of where you think we should go on that definition, or is there another definition that's even better? And then the other definition is, is the waste reduction. And the waste reduction, waste prevention, or is another term, and SWANA had, I think the first one's from EPA, and then SWANA had a different definitions. So we're going to be reaching out to back to the committee as well as a full work group to see if you, which of those definitions you like the best, or if you think there would be something even better. This is another one that we had quite a lot of conversation about, is how do we measure that waste diversion or waste reduction? And it seemed that the waste reduction index, using the per capita waste that's disposed or processed, is preferred. Confirmed waste, we had a lot of conversations, but very good conversations that came out of that topic. Because what we had originally was, once materials arrive at a landfill or an incinerator, they are confirmed to be waste in the sense that they're at the end of their ability to be recycled, or or composted, digested, recovery. But it was brought to our attention that, by using that word arrive, that's not appropriate, because it really needs to be either deposited in the permitted cell, it needs to be for disposal, or designated holding areas for incineration. So arrive's not appropriate. We need to work on that. But we also had a lot of talk about materials being placed in the landfill that no longer have any value. And maybe that's a terminology that we can use. Maybe some different wording there. And then another thing that came out of the conversation is, do we need to have a definitions for the bales that are being mined from landfill? So right now, some materials are being baled and then placed in a landfill. When that's happened, it's considered disposal. And so that's in the landfill report. But how do you account for it when it's unmined, when you finally take it out of the landfill? And then how do we count for materials going to waste to energy or incineration? And then, like I said, there was positive comments about the use of a waste reduction index. And then the other thing was that we have a lot of available data right now, and that we could create strategies and focus on that data that we currently have. Measurements should be based on verifiable data that is largely free from estimation and the use of generic conversions of factors by the recording parties. Everybody just wanted to make sure that, that we've got so much data right now, we don't need to restart everything. And then goals, this is something going back to what Malik was talking about a little bit earlier. Is it appropriate to have different measurements and goals for different levels of government or institutions or private sectors? For example, should we have one state level, statewide goal based on verifiable weight-based facility reports? And then what about the counties? Maybe that's the same as the state, since they're reporting that. Should we include municipalities in business and institutional levels, which we thought might be a little bit problematic with the legislature? But about having a state and local goals, it was suggested that we poll our full work group, and we will do that before this is all done, and use the measurements to track your own progress. So for example, if you had I'm going to just make up numbers right now. So if you had a community, a county of 250,000 people, maybe your recycling goal had been set at one level where you are today. And then your goal is, in the next 5 years, is to increase that rate by 10% or 5% or whatever would make work, according back going to some of the data that had been gathered before. We were talking about that might be a big help for some smaller counties, because now you're measuring to track your own progress. And it might help some of those smaller counties. And what is this one? We were just talking, it may be difficult though for an entity to keep up with multiple goals. And so we need, consideration is keep everything, keep it as simple as possible. Additional comments? And then additional comment, Marion, I think some of these came from you, where you keep this definition simple. I think that kind of came through from a lot of it, clarifying the differences based on the name of our subcommittee. But the waste reduction methods include tools, includes total diverted tons plus total recycled tons as it relates to MSW disposal and total generation, and then work to define those goals. And I think that's it for that. John, do you have any comments that you'd like to make? You worked a lot on this with us as well on this committee.
Kina, yeah, thanks. I guess a couple of quick comments. One is there were quite a lot of details on the slides, but I think what I would attempt to highlight, and I was a little bit late to arrive, but I think what I would attempt to highlight on the committee is the notion of going to, number one, going to sort of a per capita number where whether it's statewide or whether it's county by county, that in terms of measuring progress, we have good tonnage data for what is going into landfills, what is going into waste to energy facilities. And we also presumably have some ability to project our population and households kind of at the statewide demographic level. And that using some sort of per capita measurement where we're not actually trying to compare one county against another, where we're trying to baseline the current per capita rate and then set goals based on reducing that per capita disposal, if you will. I think that was one of the themes that came through. And I think the second thing that in my mind was, and I think historically has been a challenge in Florida, because we have such a large fleet of waste to energy, and where I think everybody acknowledges that, hey, there's definite value extracting energy from waste prior to landfilling. In my mind, one of the highlights of our discussions had to do with agreeing that once materials, if a material goes to a recycler or if it goes to compost and the material is recovered back in the stream of commerce or the nutrients are recycled, that to some degree, it's harder to measure all of that. But we can measure the materials that end up at a landfill and get put in a cell for burial. And that would be, I think we came up with the term confirmed as waste or confirmed waste, that once material is at a landfill and goes in the cell, it's confirmed waste. And once it goes to a waste to energy facility and is all keyed up for incineration, it's confirmed waste in the sense that in both of those cases, you can no longer recover the commodity for return to the stream of commerce or to compost or nutrients or what have you. So I think that was another thing that we had some, I think, back and forth, because I think some folks feel like you are recovering value at waste to energy, so that should count, which I think there was wide agreement that waste to energy is better than landfill. I don't know that we ever reached an endpoint as a subcommittee about whether it's okay to have one measure for going into a landfill versus having energy recovered. I think in my mind that was still a little bit outstanding. So Kina, I hope that helps a little bit. I don't think I'm prepared to go into any more detail, but those seem like the highlights from my standpoint.
And like I said, this committee is going to meet more, and so we need to kind of fine tune a little bit more of this. But I just wanted to kind of give everybody an update of where we were on that. So John, thank you. Karen, do you have any other comments?
Hey, Kina. No, I don't. I think John did a pretty good job, and both of you all did a good job of summarizing. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right, so we're getting toward the end of all of this. So our next steps, like I said, presentation will be sent to you later on today. I'll send it as a PDF. I think that might go through everybody's system okay. So take some time and review it and submit any comments or recommendations to me by next Friday, if that works for you. And then what I'll do over the weekend is kind of compile like a list of comments made, and then share that with the full work group during the week of July 27th. And then we'll start working on another meeting to address some of the other comments and recommendations. And I think we're getting closer and closer. We're coming up with something that we can recommend to DEP and move forward from there. So any other comments, anything else that we need to do today? Okay, if not, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing everybody socially soon. Wish we could do these in person. I tell you, I really miss the camaraderie and getting to see everybody. But we'll be able to do that soon, I hope. So take care. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thank
Be
you.
safe.
So where do I go?